to talk about the state of the economy and also the big GDP debate. The former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian has really stirred a hornet's nest once again, and a big political issue also, with questions being raised on the GDP methodology. To talk about that and a lot more, I am joined by the former Deputy Governor of the RBI and also a member of the Economic Capital Framework, Mr. Rakesh Mohan. Sir, many thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us at ET. Now, let me first begin by talking about the big issue regarding, the data credibility debate. The former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian, who many said was an insider, so to say, for the Modi government, has said that there is a problem with the GDP methodology, something that he's raised earlier also during his tenure, so much so that it could have led to an overestimation of 2.5% in the GDP. For somebody who looks at the Indian economy very closely, does that argument hold ice with you?
Well, first let me also just mention that I was also Chief Economic Advisor, but
exactly.
Almost 18 years ago now.
So, does the argument of the former Chief Economic Advisor
in some sense,
hold ground?
One would hope, having been in a position like that, that what one says should be well considered and needs to be looked at seriously. Having said that, as you know, issues have been raised about the new series of national accounts ever since it was introduced. I have looked at his paper. I have not really fully examined the exact methodology that he has employed, and also I don't have a good method of really judging whether his estimate of 2.5% of GDP overstatement on a cumulative basis, on a compound growth rate basis, but that's actually huge. If you reduce the growth rate by 2.5% since 2011-12 or thereabouts, cumulatively that comes to something like 20% or thereabouts in terms of the current estimate of GDP in absolute terms. So it's a very, very serious issue. Okay, as I said, I don't have the methodology or I haven't had time yet, in a sense, to evaluate that particular number. Having said that, I've also been raising similar issues, and he has particularly talked about manufacturing.
Right.
Okay, and the kind of I'm in fact in the process of writing a paper on which we will have a seminar here at Brookings on June 28, where I have raised this issue. Basically saying that that it is difficult to understand some parts of what's been happening in the Indian economy because of inconsistencies in indicators.
So, I'll just take that point forward. Yeah. You are saying there is inconsistency with respect to indicators, but Mosby is saying that whatever we are doing here in India with respect to the methodology is in line with the global practices. It has been approved by IMF. In fact, even the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has said that the cross country regressions is really an unusual way through which the CA has. So just to add to that, the fact that there are problems with the manufacturing side of data, plus the methodology that the CEA has used. Where are the problems that lie, and if there are problems, then what is the best way to deal with it?
Yeah, no. So as I was about to say, or as I've already said, look, I have not examined the exact methodology and what one can do to evaluate it on a numerical basis. But what I am saying is that if you look at manufacturing growth, there are 2-3 indicators that are inconsistent with the value added growth calculated in the GDP national account statistics. So if you look, for example, at manufacturing goods exports, they have been totally stagnant in absolute dollar terms for 6 to 7 years, number one. Number two, if you look at the indicators for capital goods production in the manufacturing sector, that also has just about zero growth
Right.
for the same period. If you look at capital goods imports, and those are firm numbers, okay, capital goods imports, that those are also zero growth for, or slightly negative actually, in the last 6 to 7 years. Further, other indicators, that is the index of industrial production, the annual survey of industries, for the same period, last 6-7 years, provides an annual growth rate of under 4%.
Right.
Okay, so whereas there is a new methodology, there is a new data source through
Right.
the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data, the company data.
Company, yeah.
So I don't have privileged knowledge of what exactly they're doing with that data and what that data consists of. So I cannot contest, okay, the methodology they're using. But what I am saying is that there are these inconsistencies that stare you in the face.
Right.
Okay. Similarly, if you take credit growth to industry, that's been very low for the last 6-7 years. Okay. So the point I'm making is that there are objective indicators which are difficult to argue with, which are inconsistent with the manufacturing growth indicators in the national accounts.
So
one second. So my view on this is that given that these inconsistencies exist, that it is very important for the national accounts statistics, for the CSO, for the government, to actually provide enough information to explain why there are these discrepancies.
So what is the problem here? Are they not providing enough data, or is there a problem with the methodology, or the methodology needs to be sounder? Perhaps we need to have an independent panel looking into it.
The CSO is supposed to be independent. It always has been. And the point also that Arvind Subramaniam has made, that these inconsistencies did not exist in earlier periods. Okay?
Right.
And he's right there. Similarly, the indicators that I have given, those inconsistencies did not exist in the earlier period. There have always been issues to do with the quality of the IIP, that is the Index of Industrial Production. There are some issues to do with the quality of the ASI, that is Annual Survey of Industries, but there are no issues to do with the quality of import data or the export data.
Right.
So the simple point I'm making is that given that these issues have been raised ever since the series was introduced, now Arvind Subramanian making a further point that for the credibility of India as a whole, for the credibility of Indian statistics, national accounts, which have always been held with high repute domestically and internationally, that it is very important for the government, for the CSO, for the statistics authorities to come out with explaining, look, how can we reconcile the inconsistency between different indicators and the national account statistics?
Would you also say there is a need for an independent committee to look into the methodology?
Well, I mean, that's part of as I said, it is important for them to explain the discrepancy, how they do it, whether it is through a government committee, whether it's a departmental probe, whether it's an independent committee, is for them to decide. But it is something that they ought to provide enough data, enough analytical explanations for there to be adequate debate through availability of adequate data by professional statisticians and economists.
So since you're saying that there have been inconsistencies with respect to the manufacturing side data, would you also say that perhaps this led to a faulty policy approach from from the end of the government, from the end of the bureaucrats as well?
No, I wouldn't say a faulty approach, but I would say is that to be able to design policies to achieve the objectives that you want, obviously you are handicapped if the data are not good. On the other hand, if the data are indeed good, then you have been in good shape.
How damning is it for a country like India to be dealing with the entire issue on data credibility, on GDP credibility?
I wouldn't say damning, but I would say, once again, as I said earlier, that we have had a very high reputation on the overall quality of our data for a long period of time. And it saddens me as someone who has worked in the government in technocratic positions in different places. I used to, for example, be part in the Ministry of Industry
Right.
as economic advisor, so I used to be looking very closely. I used to compile the IIP data,
Right.
so I knew many of the problems that exist in that data.
True.
But the point is that sunshine is the best policy in data, that when there are issues, there are always issues with data, you need to make as much transparency as possible so that it can be evaluated without partisan positions, because data is not a partisan issue. It also saddens me to see that some of the debate on this issue is now being politicized when data should not be politicized. Interpretation of data, yes, there will always be different policy views, different orientations, etc., of different analysts, but not on the data itself.
Right. Since we are talking about GDP, let me also shift focus to the growth figures. We are at a time where everybody is talking about a slowdown in the economy. The kind of numbers that we are seeing on the auto sales as well as FMCG, they are pointing to slowdown, a large slowdown that we had not really anticipated. What is the way out of this? This is coming in at a time when there is a new government in place. However, our exports are weak, private investment is very weak. Is it really pointing towards a larger slowdown that the Indian economy will have to grapple with in the
I think that
days to come?
I think that the first, to be able to address the issues that you have raised, the first priority of the government must be to actually recognize the issue. That you can't cure an ailment until you've diagnosed it. Okay? Or you can't cure an ailment until you first observe that you have an ailment, second, that you've diagnosed it, and third, that you find out what is the treatment you can give given the diagnosis. So I think that it would be very important for the new government to actually come to grips with what has happened, what is happening. And I must say that the two cabinet panels that the Prime Minister announced immediately, one on investment, the other on employment, are exactly the ways to go forward. But under those cabinet committees, they must start intensive, what you might call technocratic analysis of what has happened, to recognize what the issues are. And then, of course, you start devising.
Are we headed for a
solutions.
large period of slowdown or a sub 7% growth?
I don't know, because first of all, we've talked about the GDP statistics. We need to have a cleaner understanding of what those GDP growth numbers really are, if there has been indeed a problem.
Right.
If what Arvind Subramanian is saying that you're nowhere near 7%. Okay. On the other hand, if one believes that, look, actually he's wrong, and the national constitutions are correct, then of course you're near 7%. Okay. However, I would make an additional general point, which is that my observation has been that for the last number of years, there has been inadequate attention to the issue of growth.
Right.
One of the characteristics of the government of India since independence really has been that there's always been a high focus on growth. Until all through the period, you always had what we called 5-year plans. Each of them had a growth target. And you could then evaluate yourself against those longer term targets, which of course had annual targets as well. One of the interesting things about analyzing the data, growth data, since independence is that, interestingly enough, the 5-year plan targets were 90% met actually. And so, whereas I'm not saying that, look, you bring back
the 5-year plans.
Well, I would say we should bring back the 5-year plans, by the way. You may want to name it differently. And you notice the Prime Minister has already asked every ministry
to work on
come up with a 5-year plan.
Yeah, roadmap.
Roadmap, 5-year plan, he said, from what I read in the media. Okay. So, but I don't see an overall, an attempt to how are these things going to be put together, right? And so what I do believe is that you cannot, no country can achieve high growth on a consistent basis. By high growth, I mean 7% plus. We need really to be moving to 8 to 9%. You cannot achieve it without the highest level focus on growth. One of the things that has happened the last number of years is, and also among my colleague economists, there has been much more focus on how to distribute more efficiently, particularly through cash benefits, direct benefit transfers, etc. I have nothing against either cash transfers or direct benefit transfers, etc. But I do believe that that ought to be part of a broader strategy, focusing on growth. Within growth, of course, what kind of policies you should have for social welfare, direct benefits, etc. But to my mind, in the last number of years, both policymakers as well as economists have been concentrating too much on the issue of transfers and too little on the issue of growth.
So too little on the issue of growth, but when you're saying you should focus particularly on growth, would you say to focus on certain sectors, to focus on manufacturing, to provide incentives, to help MSMEs? What is it that you would want to see? Because the government is in the process of a budget making exercise. They are meeting stakeholders. Where are the low hanging fruits? Which are the issues that need to be addressed almost?
Well, I don't know if you need low hanging fruits, but there are lots of fruits. Low hanging or high hanging.
So which sectors would you say then?
I wouldn't want to pick on sectors, but what I would, well, let me take that back. And I do believe that there has to be a huge focus on manufacturing and industry overall, and particularly on labor using manufacturing.
Right.
Because one of the key problems that exists, and we've seen this, whether it's through the unemployment numbers, whether it's in any case overall concern with employment, that just some particular numbers. We have only 14 million people employed in organized sector manufacturing. In China, it's over 100 million. Okay?
So there is a need to
So it's not the case that they are 30, we are 14. Okay?
Yeah, there's a glaring gap.
100 and we are 14
Right.
with similar magnitudes of population. Right? Somehow, whenever we talk of manufacturing, you hear both the government as well as the private sector, private industry, talking about artificial intelligence, high-level industry, etc. You almost never hear about setting up manufacturing, which employs lots of people, and for consumer goods, clothing, textiles, shoes, furniture, everything that you and I have in our homes.
We've in fact lost our advantage to our neighboring nations.
Absolutely. Yeah. So somehow I don't find either the private sector being interested in this. No country has grown at 7% plus on a sustained basis without high manufacturing growth, around double-digit growth. And particularly no country, whether it's China, Korea, Japan in its earlier stages, the Southeast Asian other countries, etc. No one has grown without high growth in manufactured products which are labor using, because our per capita income, look, our per capita income is about a third or a fourth of Thailand, for example.
Right.
So it's not, we're not comparing United States. Okay, we're now about a fourth of China. So we have the labor cost advantage. It has to be utilized, and there must be focus that we've never had this focus.
Would you also say that this is of course a long-term strategy? In the short term, everybody has been talking about the liquidity concerns owing to the NBFC crisis. The NBFCs are demanding a special liquidity window. For somebody who's worked in the government, also worked in the RBI, seen things up close and personal, do you think a liquidity window is going to solve the current issues of the NBFC sector?
Let me make two kinds of comments on that. One is that as far as liquidity issues are concerned, you have to distinguish between liquidity problems and insolvency. Okay, A central bank in any country cannot solve insolvency problems,
Right.
and should not. A central bank in principle can address liquidity problems. So I don't have enough knowledge to know whether the NBFC problems are to do with insolvency or illiquidity. So in some sense the answer to your question can only be given once if one knows where are the insolvency problems or where are the illiquidity problems. Sometimes it does happen that something that starts as an illiquidity problem becomes an insolvency problem if it is not addressed. And so I think that's where we should look at, what we should look at. However, there's one other very broad general issue which is pervading the whole financial sector and which is very puzzling to me, that from the early 1990s till the late 2000s, till around 2010 or thereabouts, household sector financial savings had been in the region of around 10% of GDP. Since around 2011-12, and this all somehow, the turning factor seems to be around 2011-12,
Right.
they've come down to around 7% of GDP.
Massively.
Massive, it's huge fall. It is sort of similar to the early 80s. And if you couple that with the fact that total government borrowing, that is center plus the states, is around 7% of GDP.
Very high.
So it's not surprising that there's a problem of liquidity, because there's not high enough financial savings in the country. And one recent indicator of this general problem is the artificial insemination of liquidity that the Reserve Bank has done in the last couple of months in borrowing $10 billion through swaps, forex swaps from the banks to inject domestic liquidity. Okay.
There are two of them.
Yeah, that's it. Total combined about $10 billion, which is about 70,000 crores.
Right.
That they have, that the Reserve Bank felt it necessary, that there's not enough liquidity, that they could not inject this liquidity through open market operations, through OMOs. What does that mean? That just is not enough financial resources in the country. So what do? You go out, you get the banks to raise dollar resources, you then swap them, you set up a liability for the Reserve Bank for the future, but temporarily you inject that here. So I'm just mentioning this as an indicator of a broader financial savings problem. So this is one of the other issues that the government plus the Reserve Bank should really set up a committee or a group, analytical group, to understand what has happened. I don't. I had some understanding between around 2011 and 13, when inflation rate had gone up to around 10%, and so many real interest rates had become negative, and therefore a lot of people had switched to gold from financial saving. That I understood. But that's not the case now, when the interest rates are now, real interest is now positive.
Right. Before I let you go, sir, and this has to be the last issue that I want to touch upon. Since you're also a member of the Economic Capital Framework, we are given to understand that there are differences of opinion within the panel. Perhaps that is the reason that there is going to be another meeting that the ECF panel will be having. Does that mean that the recommendations would be favoring the government a lot more?
I won't comment on the substance of the report one way or the other. One thing I can tell you is almost all the work is done. Some final finishing touches have to be given to the report. It's always the case that when you have a committee report of a particularly technical nature, which is a fair amount of data, etc., that the final report has to be completely clean, so to speak. And so we had a meeting yesterday, and the report is almost ready. And so I think very shortly we should be able to finish our work.
When you're saying very shortly, can we expect it by the end of the month?
Yes, I would think so.
Does it also mean that perhaps, since if you can give us any bit of hint on which way is the panel heading? You've been against transferring the RBI reserves. We've seen the Malegaon panel never said anything about it when they made the recommendation also. But, generally, since we are talking about, because,
as I said, because the committee hasn't finished its work, I'm not able to comment on that on a substantive basis.
I hope you talk to us after the report is submitted.
Once the report is submitted, and I'm permitted by the chairman and the Reserve Bank talk, but I'll be very happy to.
Would you at least say that yes, the RBI has enough reserves? Has that something?
As I said, I wouldn't like to comment on this issue at all until the committee's work is finished.
Here's hoping, sir, that you talk to us after the ECF panel submits their report. On that note, many thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us at ET Now.
Thank you.